All of the best shows have the same things in common. Great actors, deep emotional writing, and a story that lives on years after being off the air. But out of all the greats, there's always one that stands out above the rest. In my opinion, that show is The Sopranos.
You got no fucking idea what it's like to be number one.
The story of this
Glorified crew
from New Jersey and the impact it had on the small screen is something special. Don't believe me?
Go fuck yourself.
Let me break it down for you. We're going to analyze certain aspects that make a show one of the greats. The writing, the characters, and the impact it had on media after it was off the air. Now, disclaimer here. From here on out, this video is going to contain spoilers.
Jesus Christ, what the fuck?
Let's start with the show's writing. The Sopranos has some of the most well thought out and articulated storytelling ever written. In the first season, as Tony goes through therapy, he has this depressive episode where he starts to hallucinate. He imagines this whole scenario where this Italian exchange student moves in next door. He imagines that he has had multiple conversations with her, tells Dr. Melfi about her, and even imagines he has a conversation with Carmela about her.
You fucking piece of shit.
His mental health continues to decline, and his depression starts to take its toll. Tony, throughout the first season, starts to compare himself as the
sad clown, laughing on the outside, crying on the inside.
Within the same episode, his own mother and uncle conspire to have him whacked. Junior hires some hitmen to take him out, but Tony has to be the luckiest person alive. At the end of the episode, he even tells Dr. Melfi that in that moment,
Every fucking particle of my being was fighting to live.
each episode is jam-packed with subplot after subplot after subplot. Despite all the different stories going on, the show itself doesn't feel rushed or lacking in structure. Season 5, Episode 12 is a great example. In this episode alone, several big key story points unfold. First of all, the FBI is getting tired of Adriana feeding them BS, so now she has to try to convince Chris to flip on Tony. Tony still has to figure out what to do with Tony B because of what he did to Phil and Billy Leotardo. Sil whacks Adriana because Chris tells Tony about her involvement with the FBI. And oh yeah, Tony moves back in with Carmela. We got a season's worth of story in a 62-minute episode without feeling like each plot point had something missing. Another example of how unmatched the writing is would be Season 3, Episode 5, titled University. We see Meadow Soprano off at college, earning her degree and working hard. Her relationship with Tony is on a decline because of the nasty things Tony said to her new boyfriend a few episodes earlier. At night, we see a different story. We see this young girl, her name is Tracy, around Meadow's age working at Sil's nightclub. We see her try and thank Tony for something he did for her off screen, and she desperately tries to get his attention throughout the episode. She ends up with probably the worst guy in the season, Ralph. The rest of the episode shows how mistreated she is, how Ralphie takes advantage of her, and eventually leads to Ralph killing her behind the nightclub. After Ralph kills her, Tony gives him a good beating, but you have to ask, Tony treated her pretty poorly throughout this episode as well. Why did he care so much? But in reality, it's so much deeper. This episode shows the contrast between Meadow and Tracy, two young women around the same age and their lives dictated by their choices and upbringing. Meadow, being spoiled, did well in school and was pushed to go to college. Now, we don't know much about Tracy and her background, but what we do know is that she does have a child, but she doesn't have custody of them. She very obviously has a different career choice than Meadow, and ultimately her life is cut short because of who she chooses to associate herself with. How Tony reacts to Tracy's death while in therapy with Carmela and Dr. Melfi is further evidence of the different viewpoints in the episode. Two different lives, two different paths, and sadly, two different outcomes. Now we're going to move on to the characters. I'm going to analyze our three main characters, Tony, Carmela, and Chris. Let's start with
Boss of this fucking family.
The
motherfucking one who calls the shots.
Tony Soprano is one of the most complex characters that's ever been written down on paper. He wasn't written as this heartless mafia figure. Tony was written as a gangster with a conscience. Now, if you've ever seen the show, you would think the statement makes almost no sense at all. On the surface, he's constantly making choices that an actual sociopath would make. But as we get a better understanding of who Tony is and where he came from and what he was conditioned to, you would start to see this depressed, angry individual that doesn't know how to process his anger or trauma. He projects himself as this hard-ass, no-nonsense boss. But in reality, he's just a sad, confused person that has panic attacks because his emotions build up with no real understanding as to why. Carmela, despite being married to Tony, she's so much more than just the boss's wife. We see Carmela do her best to appease Tony in this chaotic lifestyle, while at the same time dealing with her own frustrations. Season 4, Episode 13 shows this heavily. After she and Tony separated, Tony keeps hanging around the house. She asks him to move some chairs up to the garage, and instead he goes into their home theater where he's been staying. After a few simple jabs back and forth, Carmela admits to Tony that she's been having what seems to be an emotional affair with Furio, one of Tony's top guys. They scream back and forth, and with every shout you can feel the emotion and distress coming from her. Now, of course, that wouldn't be possible without the brilliant acting from Edie Falco.
Ooh.
He made me feel like I mattered.
You know, you asked me the other day what Irene's cousin has that you don't have. And I thought about it because it's a pretty good fucking question. And yeah, she's sexy enough, even with the one pin gone, but that's not it. I could converse with her because she had something to say.
I am here. I have things to say.
Christopher Moltisanti is another complex character that came out of The Sopranos. At the beginning of the series, Chris is portrayed as a young guy trying to make a name for himself with Tony while also juggling his own aspirations to be a screenwriter. This starts to take a toll on his relationship with Tony. As the show progresses, Chris's goals to be a screenwriter start to outweigh getting his button, and he starts to drift further from Tony, until we get to AJ's confirmation. Back at Tony's, he tells Chris to,
I'm gonna go back in there and be with my guests. Exactly 10 minutes I'm gonna look up. If you're not here, I'm gonna assume that you went to look for whatever the fuck it is that's calling you out there. And that I will never see you again. If you are still here, then I'm gonna assume that you got no other desire in the world but to be with me. And your actions will show me that every fucking second of every fucking day.
Chris chooses to stay, and I think this is a super pivotal point in Chris's character development. After this point, Chris dedicates himself to the family, and he gets his button. But because of the things he's done, Chris turns to substances, and this ultimately becomes his downfall. But what's so interesting about Chris's story is that we see how this kind of lifestyle can take a toll on those who aren't prepared for it. In other forms of mobster media, we see how this lifestyle can be exciting, living your life on the edge. But we never get to see in real time how certain aspects of this kind of life can induce PTSD and depression.
I don't know, Tony. It's like just the fucking regularness of life is too fucking hard for me or something. I don't know.
The Sopranos has had such an insane impact on TV shows and media after its finale.
Oh, get the fuck out of here.
Think about it. Before The Sopranos aired, there wasn't another show that portrayed organized crime the way it's seen in The Sopranos. There wasn't another show that pushed the envelope as to what was okay to show on TV as much as The Sopranos did. Before The Sopranos, HBO was seeing a lot of success with the film and documentary avenue. The thought of a TV show, especially a mob one, never crossed their minds. After the show aired, it paved the way for other prestige shows like Mad Men, Weeds, Breaking Bad even. Shows that had an edge. Taboo subjects that make people uncomfortable. The Sopranos explored murder, addiction, suicide, and quite a few other really emotional themes, but still did it with such decorum that it didn't feel like they were exploiting these different topics, but more or less exposing them and bringing attention to these different subjects. We haven't even gotten into how the show affected James Gandolfini or the other actors. We haven't talked about how so much of the show's scenes are based off of things that David Chase witnessed as a kid. How his mother was the direct influence for Tony's mother. Despite all these things I've missed, The Sopranos made a significant impact on TV. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if there's any other movies, TV shows, or media you'd like me to analyze. And like always, like, comment,